Hello, everybody, and welcome to another installment of Draco Veritas. So, I don't believe I have anything too crazy to discuss for the beginning of this chapter, but all trigger warnings apply just in case. So, I think without further ado, let us just get right into it. Chapter 2: New Skin for the Old Ceremony. Draco sat in the embrasure of the window in his small bedroom, watching the sun rise over the forbidden forest. The sky was a pale wash of mother of pearl, scorched with fire just over the treetops. The crystalline winter air was without any clouds. Dawn light poured in through the arc-shaped window, the shade of blood and roses, touching his face with a color it would otherwise not have had. It was light enough now to read without a torch or wand light. In his hand was the parchment that Rhys had delivered to him that morning. It bore nothing but a single word in stark, unfamiliar handwriting. Vinio, I am coming. Slowly he let the letter fall from his hands, and as it fell, it burst into flames, so only ashes landed on the bare stone floor and settled into the gaps between the stones. In a few moments, the letter might never have existed at all. Hermione jerked awake with a start. Her lids felt heavy, and her eyes were dry with exhaustion. She turned over, careful not to wake Harry, who was asleep beside her on top of the coverlet, his cloak wrapped around him, one arm flung wide, the hand resting on her pillow and half opened, the fingers curled in. It made her think of a baby sleeping, a trusting, undefended sort of gesture. His other arm was curled in against his stomach, his fist shut tight over the lightning scar that bisected his right palm. A lancing pain went through her as she looked at him. Fear mixed with protectiveness, mixed with love. Through the clear pain of his unconscious face, she could see through to the child he had been. The little boy with the too big clothes and the uncooperative hair, tough and stubborn, trusting and brave. She remembered the first time she had ever put her arms around him and told him how great of a wizard he was. He had shaken his head. I'm not as good as you. Me, books and cleverness, there are more important things. Friendship and bravery. She remembered seeing him after that, in the infirmary, had been quite sure he was dead. And when she had seen him alive again, a sort of terror had possessed her and kept her from embracing him. A terror, perhaps, that, having not lost him in that instance, she was once more vulnerable to losing him again. She moved carefully towards where he lay on the bed, so that her hand rested on his side and rose and fell with his breathing. He seemed to tense under her touch, and very slowly his eyelids fluttered and rose, and he opened his eyes. Without the glasses, they were clear windows of green glass, fringed with black lashes. She held her breath, waiting. Would he remember their fight? Would he remember last night, after she had brought him upstairs to her room? Although all he had done was fall asleep immediately, pushing away her hands as she tried to help him off with his boots and wet cloak. But his green eyes were still foggy with sleep, and he smiled at her tiredly but without surprise, as if he had expected to see her there when he woke up. He turned so that he could hold out his arms, and she went into them and let him clasp her tightly, feeling the residual dampness of his cloak under her hands, his soft breath stirring the hair at the nape of her neck. They lay like that for several minutes without speaking, before she felt his grip on her slacken, and he released her. How are you feeling? She asked very softly. He cleared his throat and winced. I feel as if someone took a lemon wedge, taped it to a 2-ton weight, and dropped it on my head. Other than that, I'm fine." He smiled at her. "And you're here, which cancels out the bad stuff." The smile turned into a puzzled look. "I barely remember anything from last night after." He went suddenly very pale, and she watched as awareness flooded into his expression, followed by shock, followed by horror. "Oh no," he said, sounding numb. "Last night, I don't know what got into me. About a quarter of vodka from the looks of things." "I think it was gin," he replied distractedly, then looked mournful. "Hermione, I went to a gentleman's club, I know." Harry looked as if he might fall off the bed. "You know? How do you know?" "You talk in your sleep," she said, and poked him with a finger. "Is Snape really there playing the clarinet?" "God, I hope not," Harry said, and cast aside the pillow he had been holding with a gesture of despair. "Draco decided we should go to the Sleazy Weasel. You know I never would have gone on my own. Please forgive me." Hermione blew out a breath of exasperation. "Harry, I don't care about that. So you went drinking. So you went to the, Sleazy Weasel. What a ridiculous name. I don't care. I don't even blame Draco for taking you. He was just trying to cheer you up, and if it worked, for heaven's sake, I'd be the first person thanking him. I've been so worried." "I'm not just sorry about that." He stood up and took her by the wrists, lifting her to her feet. She rose along with him and stood, tilting her head up to look at him. "There's also what happened in the common room. I'm sorry about that. I was a total git, and forgive me, please." Hermione hesitated. Harry's hands tightened, and she could feel his grip braceleting her wrists, and stared up to search his face. Behind the sheer green color of his eyes was concern, and even a rising panic. He was afraid she wouldn't forgive him. "Of course I forgive you," she said, hearing her own voice as if at a distance, remote and a little cold. "There's almost nothing you could do that I wouldn't forgive you for, and you know that." A little of the fear went out of his expression, but some anxiety remained, like the after-image of sun against closed eyelids. "I don't know what's been bothering you, Harry," she said, "but something is." She pulled her wrists out of his grasp, took his hands, and turned them over. Along the side of his right hand was an ugly bruise, and on both palms were the faded half-moon imprints where nails had been dug into the skin. "You're beating yourself up about something, literally as well as figuratively. And if you don't tell me what it is that's tearing you apart, then you put a gulf between us. And if one day I can't reach you across it, then you have no one to blame but yourself." She raised her eyes to his face, and for a moment saw the shudders drop from his expression, exposing, for a moment, the Harry she knew, vulnerable, bewildered, fiercely loving. Then his eyes slid away from her face. "I love you," he said, his tone hopeful and a little defensive, but she reacted to the declaration anyway, as she always had. She raised her face, and he kissed her gently, the light stubble along his jaw and chin brushing her skin. She put her arms around him then, and he held her, his face bowed down into her hair, hands clasped across her back. But even as they stood locked together, seemingly as close as two people could be, Hermione felt the distance between them and knew that it had not been breached. Ginny poked morosely at her plate of eggs and toast. She wasn't sure why she was in such a mood. Perhaps it was nervousness over the match that afternoon, or perhaps it was the fact that she hadn't slept well the night before. She ate another bite of eggs and refrained from looking at the Slytherin table. Instead, she looked hopefully around, as if Harry, Hermione, or Ron might have spontaneously appeared since she last looked. But no, they were all late to breakfast. Next to her, Lavender and Parvati burst into a fresh spat of giggling. Ginny was able to catch amidst the giggles the words Draco and succulent. Ginny sighed. Ever since Hermione had told Lavender and Parvati that Draco Malfoy wasn't so bad when you got to know him, they'd felt free to express their crushes on him that they'd probably had all along. Just watching him get up and down from the Slytherin table at mealtimes had become something of a spectator sport for them. "You know, in a way, it's lucky he's in Slytherin," said Parvati a bit mistily. "Green really suits him." Ginny rolled her eyes. "Oh, for goodness sake, you two. Here comes Draco Malfoy. Let's all pitch our knickers at him in a mad fit of passion." "There's no point pitching our knickers at him," interrupted Lavender severely. "He's dating Blaise. He can't infringe on another girl's territory, even if she is a Slytherin. It's the girl code of conduct." Ginny raised an eyebrow. "The girl code of conduct?" "It's like the wizard code of conduct," said a familiar voice in her ear, "only with more corsets." Ginny turned around to see her brother in the process of taking a seat beside her. "Ron!" she said, astonished. "You look awful." He did indeed, as if he hadn't slept all night. His hair was a mess, and there were nearly black circles of exhaustion under his blue eyes, but his grin radiated good humor. "Thanks, Gin. I know I can always count on you to fluff up the old ego." Ginny handed him the plate of eggs. "Did you not get any sleep, or what?" Shoveling food into his mouth, Ron did not answer. A moment later, Harry and Hermione joined them at the table. Neither of them looked particularly well rested either, although this surprised Ginny less. Last time she'd seen Harry, he'd been unconscious, and she surmised that Hermione had probably been up taking care of him all night. "I'm so glad we have a match against Slytherin today," said Ginny breezily. "Harry and Ron just look ready to mop the field with them." And she shoved the water pitcher in Harry's direction. "Rehydrate, Harry, and try not to throw up on Draco when you go to catch the snitch." "Why would Harry throw up on Malfoy?" asked Ron, bemused. "I mean, not that that's a bad idea, per se." Instead of explaining, Harry dutifully drank the water, while Hermione looked at him anxiously. "Do you want to go to Madame Pomfrey?" she said in a whisper. "I know she must have hangover potions around somewhere, and I haven't got time to make you one before the game." Harry waved his hand feebly. "I'll go before History of Magic." "What are you two whispering about?" asked Ron quizzically. Hermione gave him an innocent look. "Nothing. I was just about to say that I've got some pepper-up potion in my trunk if you need it, Ron. You look a little tired, too." "I'm not tired," said Ron, and yawned hugely. "I'm fine." Hermione raised an eyebrow. "You do remember we have a prefects meeting at 2:00, don't you?" "Good point," said Ron. "No pepper-up potion for me. It'd be too cruel to deprive me of the opportunity to sleep through one of those meetings." Hermione just shook her head and reached for the pumpkin juice. The roof of the prefects' hall disappeared into darkened rafters overhead. The round table that sat in the middle of the room, around which generations of school prefects had sat, was scarred with the marks of years, the incisions of quills, sliced initials, stains of spilled ink. In the center of the table was a slightly raised silver ring, about 10 inches in diameter. The north wall of the room held 2 stained glass windows, gold and blue, while the south wall's windows were green and scarlet. Ron stood at the head of the table, his back to the east wall. There was a long white finger of clear window behind him, mazed with frost, and through it more whiteness was visible. Snow caught in the bare branches of trees, the colorless spark of sunlight off icicles. In front of all the whiteness, Ron's bright hair and scarlet jumper stood out like burning banners. "This meeting will come to order." He rapped on the table with a hand and grinned over at Hermione, who raised her wand and waved it towards the center of the table. where the Hogwarts emblem was emblazoned inside an etched silver circle. "Ascendus Orbis," she said, and the silver circle detached itself and rose into the air, spinning lazily. She watched until it hung, spinning, about a foot above the table. Then she spoke. "This meeting is now in progress. All right, then. First order of business." But at that very moment the door opened, and Draco strode in, looking as cool as he ever did. The other 24 prefects turned and looked at him. "Malfoy, get over here and sit down," said Ron testily. "You're late." "I don't take orders from you, Weasley," replied Draco irritably. Pansy Parkinson, the other 7th-year prefect, pushed the chair next to her out so that he could sit down, and Draco did. Hermione cleared her throat and continued. "Motion to have all school prefects engage in a search for Trevor the Toad. Unanimous vote of nay. Sorry, Neville." Neville, who was not a prefect, but who had been allowed to sit in on the meeting to hear the result of his request, looked resigned. "All right, then," said Ron, shuffling his own papers. "On to the next order of business. The 7th-year pub crawl was a disaster last year, with at least 6 underclassmen having taken aging potions to try and fool the security barriers, and 2 6-years drank an entire bottle of giant wine and hexed each other. One of them still has vestigial antennae sticking out of his head. We can't allow this kind of thing to happen again this year." "Well, what can we do about it?" asked Padma Patil, and as she spoke, the spinning circle turned blue for Ravenclaw. "I think we need some more specific rules," said Justin Finch-Fletchley, and the sphere turned gold. "Like the fizzy lifting drinks can only be consumed inside." Everyone chuckled. Nobody at the table had been at the previous year's pub crawl, but they had all been told about Eric Sorensen, the 6th-year who had floated almost to the height of the Hogsmeade church spire and had to be retrieved by townspeople on broomsticks. "Which establishments are involved this year?" asked Padma. "Fred and George are turning Weasley's Wizard Wheezies into a winery," said Hermione. "Weasley's Wizard Winery?" asked Draco as the sphere turned green. "Yes," said Hermione, ignoring Ron's look of irritation, and pressed on. "The 3 broomsticks, of course, the Hogshead and the Shifty Lemur. Plus, Florian Fortescue is bringing his ice cream cart up with butterbeer, sorbet, and Honeydukes will be providing free candy. Also, the Book Nook will have herbal teas for those who wish to enjoy the event unintoxicated." "Wimps," commented Draco quietly. "And the chip shop will be open as well. Now, it's really a pretty simple event. Everyone gets a parchment as they leave, explaining what each establishment will be offering, and of course the events will be staggered. Who wants to hand out the parchments?" Everyone looked shifty, but eventually Pansy volunteered. Mostly, Draco suspected, because she didn't have a date for the event. "All right, now the main question is keeping the younger students from trying to sneak along," Hermione continued, shooting a look at the 6th-year prefects, who grumbled quietly. "Now, in terms of solving that problem..." Hermione's voice slowly faded from Draco's consciousness, as the exhaustion of not having slept much the night before had begun to press in on him. He was having a difficult time keeping his eyelids from drooping. Shading his eyes with his hands, he looked down at the table, hoping it would seem as if he was lost in thought, and shut his eyes. The sound of the others' voices in the room receded like a wave drawing back, and the darkness of sleep gathered him in. Draco looked around. He was in the same tower room, although the furnishings had multiplied. Atop the long table against the wall were piled a dizzying array of magical objects: silver flasks and phials, mortars of jade, clear amulets, and cauldrons whose cold contents glowed an eerie bluish green. Behind him, he could see a wall lined with shelves which held all manner of things: jars of mummified parchment, astronomy charts, crucibles, miniature braziers and urns, several stands of candles, and what looked like an anthanaurum. A tapestry on the south wall almost brushed the long table. It depicted a skull with flowers growing from its empty eye sockets, and the words embroidered beneath it: "I am the assassin against whom no lock can hold." In the middle of the room stood two men, side by side, and looking down at an etched pentagram on the floor.
"Where is Rookwood?"
said the voice of one of the men.
"He is in the other room, my lord. He has brought what we sought with him and asks again for your forgiveness."
A sharp, indrawn, hissing breath.
"Let him in."
"It might not be the right mirror, my lord," said Lucius Malfoy anxiously, looking sideways at his master, and Draco noticed that he was wearing dark crimson robes today, banded with black. He had often worn red into the woods when they had gone hunting together years ago, to hide the blood.
"It will be the right mirror,"
said Voldemort. A tall, slotted door in the wall slid open, and Rookwood entered, carrying in his hands a medium-sized mirror. The reflecting surface was made of polished silver, and the body and handle were twisted like a tress and made of bronze. The border was full of stylized engravings of whirlwinds and birds. It reminded Draco vaguely of the workmanship done on the scabbard of Harry's Gryffindor sword. Rookwood went down on his knees in front of Voldemort, his head bowed. The Dark Lord stretched out a pale, long-fingered hand and took the mirror from him. From his vantage point behind them, Draco could see Voldemort raise the mirror in his hand and glance thoughtfully at his own malevolent expression. Then he opened his hand, and the mirror slowly rose about a foot into the air and hovered there, directly in front of him, as if it was caught in a strong magnetic field. His reflected face vanished as the surface of the mirror clouded over, as if a swarm of blue smoke swirled up from its depths.
"What do you see, my lord?"
asked Lucius finally, breaking the silence.
"I see the boy."
Voldemort's voice was cold and sinuous as a snake. Very slowly, he lowered the mirror and put his hand against the surface, in which Draco saw someone he didn't recognize at first. But when he moved closer to get a better look, the image began to slip away.
"Malfoy! Hey, Malfoy!"
At the sound of his own name, consciousness came back to Draco like a dash of cold water in the face. For the start, he focused his eyes, seeing the room reel around him before it settled into stillness. The first thing that came into focus was Hermione's face, pale and worried. Next to her stood Ron, who looked vexed and irritable, his blue eyes sparkling like gas flames turned low.
"Malfoy, were you not listening? Hermione asked you a question. Are you willing or not?"
"Of course I am," said Draco, without the slightest idea of what he had just agreed to do. The room was still spinning slightly, and his head was full of echoing voices. There was a sharp pain behind his eyes. Hermione looked surprised, as did Ron.
"That settles, then,"
she said, and put down the parchments she had been holding, but was still looking at him keenly.
"All right. We look well on our way to having the best seventh-year pub crawl ever."
Ron grinned. "Anything else?" When everyone was silent, Hermione waved her wand again and murmured,
"Orbis Disciplinarius,"
and the whirling silver circle returned to its place in the center of the table and was still.
"Meeting adjourned."
As the prefects filed out of the room, Draco felt a tap on his shoulder. It was Pansy Parkinson, her pug nose wiggling with curiosity.
"A
can't believe you agreed to stay back from the pub crawl and make sure no one tries to sneak along the Hogsmeade, she said, shaking her head. Whatever possessed you, Draco? Draco stopped in his tracks. I did what? Blaze thought you were going to go with her. She'll be furious. And Pansy walked off, still shaking her head, the bright pink ribbons in her hair trembling. Draco looked after her thoughtfully. Furious, eh? He said to himself. Ah, well, always a silver lining, I suppose. Draco, came a soft voice behind him. He turned at the sound, a dull sense of foreboding settling over him. Hermione was walking towards him along the corridor, having ditched the other prefects some ways back. He stood where he was, eyebrows raised, as she approached him. Whatever she wanted, he was sure it had something to do with his dozing off in the prefects' meeting. He noticed her curious dark eyes when he had come to. When she reached him, the first words she spoke came out in a rush. Are you all right? She asked under her breath. I was worried about you. His eyebrows shot up. Worried? What do you think had happened to me? She hesitated for a moment, unsure how to explain that what had struck her was a vague and terrible sense of apprehension, sourceless and inexplicable. I don't know, but you looked ill, she finished lamely, biting her lip. She could tell he was hiding something from her, but was in no mood to tell. She opened her mouth to say more, when suddenly a voice spoke from behind them. Ah, Draco, it said congenially. Just the person I've been looking for. Draco looked up and saw Professor Lupin standing behind them, looking tired but expectant. His brow furrowed a little as he regarded them. Am I interrupting something important? He asked. No, Draco replied casually, and turned fully to the other man. Did you need something, Professor? Lupin glanced curiously at Hermione's tense face, but said, Yes. See, the time has come for us to talk about your end-of-year projects. Draco's eyebrows shot up in surprise. Lupin smiled. It won't be that bad, and you will have the rest of the year to work on it. I thought you and Harry might want to work on yours together, since I know you'll be spending your holiday break at the manor. He'll be with Hermione, too. You didn't need to put him with me. She can work alone. You'll work better with Harry, said Lupin with finality. Draco subsided. I don't mind working with Harry, he said. Good. Lupin smiled and passed Draco a scrap of parchment. Any reason you wanted to give me this assignment now instead of in class? Draco asked as he took the parchment from Lupin. I just thought you'd like me to tell you in private, rather than announcing it in front of the whole class. Draco nodded slightly in response. All right, continued Lupin, and held out a hand for Draco to shake. Good luck on the game, then, and may the best team win. Surprised, Draco took the pro-offered hand and shook it. I thought you were a Gryffindor fan, Professor, he said curiously. Is that what you thought? Said Lupin mildly, then turned and walked away. Hermione looked after him with great curiosity. I wonder what he meant by that. Draco turned back to her, shoving the parchment with the assignment on it into his bag. Not sure, he said, half turning around. I'll see you after the match. There's somewhere I need to go first. Then he turned and stalked away from her, before Hermione could call after him or remind him not to be late for the Quidditch match. Ginny tried to stifle a yawn. She was sitting between Elizabeth and Seamus on the uncomfortable wooden benches in the Quidditch changing room. The team had been waiting for almost 10 minutes after the game was supposed to start, when Harry slipped off to talk to Madame Hooch. He was back in a moment, looking slightly ruffled, and glanced around at his jumpy-looking team. Game's on hold, he said briefly. One of the Slytherin players isn't here yet. Colin snorted. Don't they have to forfeit then? Harry shrugged. Madame Hooch says we wait, so we wait. I wouldn't want to forfeit anyway, Ron said, snapping on his wrist guards.
I want to beat them. That's the spirit, said Harry.
Ginny scanned the team and noted how bored everyone looked. I think we need a pep talk, she said, and smiled at Harry. He looked put upon.
You guys don't need a pep talk, he said. All we need to do is go out there and play and win. We don't know the meaning of the word defeat.
Ron made a muffled, choking noise, and Harry grinned at him.
Well, we know the meaning of it. We're not stupid.
His eyes scanned the room.
So, was that peppy enough?
Colin looked up from his conversation with Elizabeth.
Sorry, Harry, did you say something?
This time Ron's laugh wasn't muffled, but Elizabeth, who had looked up when Harry had spoken, said suddenly, "Hey, Ron!" she said, her brown eyes lighting with sudden curiosity.
"What's that on your neck?"
Ginny turned around, and so did Seamus and Colin, in time to see Ron look startled and put a hand to his neck.
"What?"
"You've got a bite mark,"
said Elizabeth, hugely amused.
"Right there."
And she pointed to the side of Ron's neck. Ron flushed as scarlet as a sunset and clapped his hand over his neck, but it was too late. "Ron's got a hickey," Seamus announced delightfully. "Unbelievable." Ginny stared at her brother in astonishment. How on earth? Well, she never expected any of her brothers to tell her everything, or even most things. But Ron, well, Ron had always seemed to her to be a bit of a romantic, a dreamer. Unserious snogs were not in his nature, and he'd never have a girlfriend and not tell her, or at the very least Harry, and it was very evident from Harry's expression that he was as surprised as everyone else. "So, Ron," said Seamus, leaning on his broomstick, "who's the girl? I don't quite recognize the teeth marks." Ron was still scarlet. "There's no girl," he said, looking at the floor. "A boy, then?" Seamus was grinning. "I'd no idea." "No, it's just I walked into a door," said Ron, rather desperately. "With your neck?" Harry asked, his eyebrows raising. "Yes," said Ron firmly. Ginny snorted, and Ron rounded on her. As he did, she got a good look at his neck. "Ron Weasley," she teased in a superior tone, "you do have a hickey." Ron looked as if he were going to have a coronary. "I do not have a hickey!" Harry reached out then and grabbed Ron by the arm. "Okay, if you want to be like that," he said. "Sod waiting for the match to start. We're having a little talk." And with that, he frog-marched Ron out of the changing room. Ginny watched them go, fascinated. "Do you think Ron has a secret girlfriend?" said Seamus from behind her. "I don't know," she said. "It's possible." She turned around and looked at him. He was looking at her kindly, but there was something in his eyes that spoke of nervousness. That was odd. Seamus was rarely nervous. "Hey, since we have a moment," he said suddenly, "I was wondering if I could talk to you about something." She blinked at him in surprise. "Sure, what about?" "No, not here," he said, with a meaningful look at the rest of the team. "Outside." "But aren't Harry and Ron out there?" "I promise we won't go anywhere near them." "Okay," she said, and followed him out into the snowy air. Down the path and under a tree, she could see Harry and Ron talking quietly. She did her best to ignore them and turned to Seamus, who was looking expectant. "What did you want to talk about?" she asked. Seamus rubbed the back of his neck. I had a much different idea in mind for how I would ask you this, but I was wondering if you would like to hang out with me the night of the pub crawl." Astonishment rendered Ginny momentarily speechless. Then she said quickly, "But I'm a sixth year, Seamus. I can't go to the pub crawl." "I know," said Seamus patiently, "but I thought I'd skip it and hang out with you instead." "Oh," said Ginny. Seamus looked at her. His expression was quizzical, but she could see he was still a little nervous. Ginny felt herself blush a little. It had been rather nervy of him to ask her like this, especially since they didn't know each other that well. "I'd love to hang out with you, Seamus," she said. A smile like a sunrise broke over his face. "That's great," he said. "And you can tell Ron I'll have you back by midnight. It's a bit terrifying asking out the head boy's little sister." "Ron will be at the pub crawl," said Ginny. "He'll drink a galleon of fire whiskey and be absolutely legless by midnight. He wouldn't notice if you returned a giant pumpkin to Gryffindor Tower instead of me. He'll figure it out by the next morning, though, and that head boy badge is sharp. I want to keep my skin intact." He grinned. She looked back at him, seeing the expression in his eyes, the expression she'd seen on Harry's face when he looked at Hermione, the way Draco sometimes looked at her. It made her want to cry. Without even knowing what she was doing or why, she put her arms around him and hugged him fiercely. He was warm and solid, the heavy jumper making him bulky, although underneath it he was lithe and almost muscular. "Ginny," he whispered, "are you all right?" "Yeah," she said after a moment. "Can we just stay still for a second? Just like this?" As if he understood, he put his arms around her and held her back. She rested her head against his chest, hearing the thickly muffled beat of his heart through the wool sweater, as regular as the ticking of a clock. At that very moment, Draco began to make his way down the front steps to Hogwarts. They were cold and slick with ice. He sped down them, taking a shortcut down to the Quidditch pitch, the one that cut along the lake, and down past the west side of the pitch, where the Gryffindor changing rooms were. As he neared his destination, he saw that the stands above were filled with people, and as he quickened his pace, his gaze fell on a splash of gold and red by the side of the Gryffindor hut. A person. No, not one person, but two people. Two people clinging very close together, as if against a cold wind. Two sets of arms in their red and gold, the sleeves wrapped around each other. A tousled sandy head, and a waterfall of familiar scarlet hair. Seamus Finnegan and Ginny Weasley. "Well, what did you expect?" said a knife-sharp voice in his own mind as he stopped, stared, and then forced himself to move again. He averted his gaze as firmly as he could and stalked towards the Slytherin side, where his teammates awaited. said a voice behind the two of them, and Ginny let go of Seamus and turned around to see Harry standing not too far away, his broomstick in his hand. He dropped her a wink before Seamus turned around as well. "Hate to interrupt, but the game's starting." Ginny dropped her head to hide a smile. "Sorry, Harry," she said, not exactly sure what she was apologizing for. "Perfectly all right," said Harry cheerfully, and stepped back to let Seamus, who was blushing very faintly but looking pleased, walk past him towards the changing rooms. Ginny moved to follow him, but paused to fall into step with Harry, consumed with curiosity. "Did Ron tell you anything?" she demanded. "Has he been snogging someone on the side?" Harry gave her a lopsided smile. "He really wouldn't say." Ginny gave a small chortle as they entered the changing room. "Great Merlin, do you think it was someone really dreadful and now he's embarrassed?" she said, fascinated. "Maybe it was Millicent Bulstrode or something." Harry made a face. "She'd have taken a much bigger bite out of his neck, I'd wager." "Tess Hammond?" Harry rolled his eyes. "Not even if he were drunk on 65 whiskies." "Someone with a boyfriend, then? Maybe he's afraid he'd get in trouble." Harry cocked an eyebrow. "I feel unprepared to even venture a guess. I'll ask Hermione after the game. She spent more time with him than I have lately." Ginny chuckled again. "Ron in love with a mystery girl," she said cheerfully. "I love it." Harry grinned at her.
Maybe Seamus is right and it's a mystery boy, he said. Ever think of that?
Well, I don't see why he'd bother hiding it, said Ginny, tucking her broomstick under her arm and heading with Harry towards the doorway that led to the pitch. I mean, Mum and Dad thought Percy was gay for ages, and they were fine with it. Kept blanketing him with leaflets and trying to get him to open up about his feelings. Harry laughed. Percy? Really? Oh, yes. They were quite perplexed when Penelope showed up, she added, and ducked under the ropes that cornered off the pitch. The rest of the team was there, waiting, including Ron, who had pulled the collar of his sweater up as high as it would go, and now resembled a turtle of some sort. Ginny chanced to wink at him, and he colored. "Your parents really are amazing," said Harry, and Ginny turned to add a smiling affirmation, but was arrested by the look on Harry's face. Always, before every game, he scanned the stands for Hermione, and she could tell by his expression that he had just found her. She followed his gaze and saw her sitting between Janet and George, a pile of books in her lap, looking down at the pitch and waving. Both the twins liked to watch their younger siblings fly, and were trading off coming in for matches when the joke shop wasn't too busy. She turned away from the stands and caught Seamus's eye. He smiled at her sweetly, and she smiled back, then moved to stand next to him as the team mounted their broomsticks. It was a brisk winter afternoon, so sharply chilly that Ginny's eyes stung. She raised her head, feeling the cool air touch the tip of her nose. Her hair was bundled under a black woolly hat, and the fingerless gloves on her hands were tipped with mini warming charms, but the chill still seeped into her skin. She glanced around. The ground below the pitch was scraped clean and looked as flat and icy as a skating rink. The diminishing sunlight stripped it with bars of gold. Behind the pitch rose the forbidden forest, the trees immense and winter black. Stripped of leaves and outlined by the snow, they had a thorny medieval symmetry. The crowd whooped and cheered from the stands, many of them clutching orange hot potatoes, a new product from Weasley's Wizard Wheezies that exploded in house colors after the game ended. Ginny heard a round of booing and realized that the Slytherin team must have just come out onto the pitch, opposite them. She turned to look at them and couldn't help but catch in her breath as she took them in. The whole team gleamed as if they had just been polished. They had made some alterations to their uniforms. Instead of the usual light-colored corduroys, they wore black, along with lace-up leather boots instead of trainers. Polished silver buckles held their emerald robes in place over their shoulders. The general overall effect reminded Ginny of a team of horses who drew the Beauxbatons carriage. Sleek, purebred, mean as hell. She felt herself tense. Gryffindor-Slytherin matches were always the worst, for a multitude of reasons. She hated how fierce and embattled they always were. Draco was the best flyer in the school after Harry, and the only one who could really challenge him on his own ground. She also knew that Harry didn't like having to fly against him, although he never let it get in the way of the game. Harry was nothing if not consummately professional where Quidditch was concerned. As if he knew Ginny was thinking about him, Harry tapped her on the shoulder. "You ready?" he asked. She set her shoulders and nodded. "Yes." Harry returned her nod, and Madame Hooch blew her whistle. "Captains, greet each other," she called out, and first Draco, then Harry stepped out onto the pitch. They met in the middle, and each held out their hand to shake. As they broke off the handshake and repaired to their respective teams, the crowd above them roared and cheered. Blaise stood on her tiptoes and kissed Draco lightly on the mouth, as she always did before games. He barely moved or acknowledged the gesture, seeming to accept it as his due, which made Ginny roll her eyes. Madame Hooch's whistle blew again, and Ginny seized her broom and kicked off with the rest of the team. 14 players rose up towards the darkening silver sky, and the game began. The first shot of the day came when something huge and black shot towards Ginny. A bludger hit by Tess Hammond. She ducked it as Colin flew in front of her, knocking the bludger back towards Blaze with a mighty heave. Blaze elegantly swerved around the bludger, shooting Colin a vicious look as she did so. Colin looked slightly frightened. Blaze was an expert at nasty looks.
"Ginny, over here!"
It was Elizabeth Thomas, the quaffle in her grasp. She hurled the ball towards Ginny, who caught it, turned, and streaked towards the other end of the pitch. The cold air cut her face, making her eyes sting. As she neared the Slytherin goalposts, 3 dark figures shot in front of her: Blaze, Graham, and Malcolm. As chasers, they couldn't touch her, but they could certainly block her way. Colin drove them off with a well-directed bludger, but precious seconds had elapsed, and as Ginny started forward, Tess and Millicent swooped in, furiously hitting bludgers towards her, and she was forced to toss the quaffle to Seamus. Blaze intercepted the throw, passed to Malcolm, who swatted the ball through the post so hard it nearly took Ron's head off when he tried to block it. There was a discontented rumble from the stands. Nobody liked a Slytherin victory except, of course, the other Slytherins. Ginny grunted in frustration, and when the quaffle came back into play, this time she dove after it fiercely, swatting it away from Blaze, then sped across the pitch, casting the ball towards Seamus. He caught it and headed away, and as she looked after him, she saw something glint below her. A snitch. It shot beneath her feet, and Harry and Draco rocketed after it, neck and neck, 2 blurs of green and scarlet. As Ginny turned to look down at the flying golden ball and its pursuers, something flashed out of the corner of her eye, and she had just enough time to see Blaze Zabini seize Tess Hammond's bat out of her hand and whack the nearest bludger as hard as she could towards her. The world seemed to freeze for a split second, and before Ginny could spare a thought to duck, she felt it collide with the side of her skull. The pain of it stabbed into her eyes, a hard and agonizing pain that sharpened to a point and drove itself right between her eyes. She felt her limbs stiffen, cold tearing at her insides like knives. Her fingers froze, then went lifeless, and she could no longer hold the broom. The world turned upside down, the sky at her feet, the glittering, ice-covered world racing up to meet her. She screamed once before everything went black. Racing Harry towards the snitch, Draco's world had narrowed itself down to just himself and his goal, the tiny golden object only feet away. He heard the rushing of wind in his ears, the pounding of his heart, and then, cutting through everything else, a scream. It sounded like Ginny. He whirled around in midair, almost dislocating his shoulder as his firebolt jerked sideways. Somewhere off to his left, he heard Harry swear fiercely, but he wasn't paying attention. His eyes were fixed on the scarlet-robed figure on the swaying broom. He saw Ginny shudder and tumble sideways. From somewhere in the stands, Draco heard Dumbledore's voice ring out from the crowd. "Arresto momentum!" Ginny began to fall slower now, until she came to rest on the ground, where she lay motionless. Screams rose from the crowds in the stands. Charlie and George were on their feet, shoving their way through the packed mass of people. Somewhere, Professor McGonagall was shouting. The Gryffindor and Slytherin teams were in disarray, and Draco supposed he should rally his team, but it seemed a very small thing. Pointing his broom towards the ground at a near vertical angle, he shot downward with a speed that would have made even Wronski jealous. The cold wind sang in his ears like music. He imagined he had never flown so fast or so hard. He hit the ground on his hands and knees with bone-breaking force and scrambled to his feet. All around him, the other Quidditch players were falling down like a shower of falling stars, red and green. He ran towards a splash of crimson against the white snow that was Ginny, somewhat conscious of chaotic milling up in the stands, of the sound of yelling voices. and then he reached her and went down on his knees in the snow next to her, and he could see her face was covered in blood, where it gushed from her nose and mouth. As he reached for her, her dark eyes fluttered open, and she looked up at him. There was a blank sort of wonder in her gaze, as if she were both surprised to see him there and had accepted it as inevitable. "Draco?" she said, her voice sounding watery. His voice came out in a whisper. "Yeah," he said, "it's me." He reached his hand towards her, and then something grabbed him violently by the back of his robes and hauled him into a standing position. Whirling around, he saw that it was Seamus Finnegan, white with fury. "What do you think you're doing, Malfoy?" he spat. "Stay away from her." The rest of the Gryffindor team had landed. Draco saw the Creevy brothers approaching to back Seamus up, Elizabeth running forward, and Ron, white and stricken-looking, pushing past the others to get to his sister. Tess and Blaze were still in the air, but the other Slytherins were on the ground, standing at a distance, staring in surprise. He could feel Blaze's eyes on him, but he didn't care. He turned back to Seamus. "Touch me again, and I'll break every bone in your fucking body, Finnegan. Don't think I won't," he said, enunciating each word clearly. Seamus paled but held his ground. "I'm not going anywhere." Draco drew his left arm back. He was never sure later what he meant to do. Hit Seamus or hurl a spell at him. It didn't matter. As his arm went back, a firm hand grabbed his wrist and held it, hard. He turned around, already knowing whose hand held him. Harry. He was pale but composed, his green eyes dark and serious. "I can't let you do this, Malfoy. Let me go, Potter." There was an evenness to Draco's tone that was almost frightening. "I caught the snitch in the chaos," Harry shot back. "Not that it matters, but the game's over. And I can't have you ruining our ruse just because Ginny is hurt." Draco felt as if Harry had hit him. "What?" Harry tightened his grip on Draco's wrist until he could feel the pulse pounding there, swift and even. Behind the tight knot of Gryffindors, Harry could see Madame Pomfrey approaching quickly, a magical stretcher at her side. At the edge of the pitch stood Charlie and George, being held back by several professors, including Snape. "We made a promise, Malfoy. Every second we stand here is another second that will make everyone suspicious. If you go near her, the rest of my team will try and stop you. Besides, you can't do anything for her." "You don't know that," Draco spat, trying in vain to wrench his wrist out of Harry's hand. His next thought came with a sharp force of a blow, crackling like a whip inside Harry's head. "Let me go, Potter!" With misgivings, Harry released his grip on Draco's wrist, and the other boy took a step back, and then another. He faced Harry, his eyes nearly black with fury, and something else. Harry had seen him look like that before, and it hit him like a blow, but there was nothing he could do. "I'll tell you what happens," Harry thought. "Just, please, go." Draco's eyes narrowed into slits, and he looked as if he were about to speak. Then, as suddenly as he had whipped around in midair, he spun on his heel and stalked off the pitch, up the hard-packed snowy path to the school, his boots cracking the ice underfoot like the sound of breaking bones. Harry watched him go, then turned, and out of habit searched for Hermione in the stands. He saw her immediately. She was on her feet, her hands over her mouth. As he looked at her, she took a step back, turned, and dashed away from the pitch, up the path towards school, after Draco. Hermione's feet slipped and slid on the ice as she raced up the front stairs of Hogwarts. She ran without really looking where she was going, and without thinking about why she was running. The look on Draco's face before he fled the pitch, fierce, furious, desperate, had frightened her. The entrance hall was cold and deserted. She darted left, down the hallway that led to the Slytherin dungeons. The tapestries on these walls were green, just like the tapestries that led to the stairs to the Gryffindor tower were red. Hermione paused. Was that a voice? It was coming from farther down the hall, and so was another, deeper voice. She slowed down and turned the corner. A flight of stone stairs led down, and the voices were coming from below. She was halfway down the stairs before she recognized one voice, Draco's, and the other, a girl's. She leaned forward over the carved stone banister. Below, in a patch of torchlight, she could see Draco, and facing him, looking furious, was Blaise Zabini. The wavering light glittered on the jewelry she wore, and her eyes looked huge in the dim light, as dark and glossy green as leaves under water. "Don't you walk away from me, Draco Malfoy," she was saying in a freezing voice. "Don't you even think about it. I want an explanation." "An explanation?" Draco's voice was a thin steel dagger. The melting snow in his hair washed pale strands into his eyes. He pushed them back with an impatient hand, on which the Malfoy seal ring glittered like a malevolent eye. "Blaise, darling." He spit the word out as if it were an insult. "You came running after me to demand an explanation?" He put his hands on her shoulders and pushed her gently back against the wall, pinioning her there with his arms, when I should be the one asking you for one. Hermione had to give Blaise credit. She didn't back down, only raised her chin, poised and furious-looking. "Don't act as if you're above cheating. It's bad enough that you're always goggling at Harry Potter's girlfriend. Now this," she spat. "What is it with you and those Gryffindors?" "You're jealous," said Draco. "Isn't that cute?" He didn't look as if he thought it was cute. His expression was calm, even disinterested, but his eyes were thunderous. Hermione wondered how much that had to do with Blaise, and how much had to do with his ejection from the Quidditch pitch. "It's my prerogative to be jealous," said Blaise icily. "I'm your girlfriend." She reached up and pushed his arms away, matching him glare for glare. "What's going on with you, Draco? I want to know." "There's nothing going on with me," he said flatly. "Then what were you doing?" "What did it look like?" "It looked like you were having a fit over some Gryffindor." Draco shrugged. "So I was being sportsmanlike. We can't keep on playing when the opposing team is falling off their broomsticks." "Draco, we're Slytherins. We keep playing even the other team gets struck by lightning and turn into a brave little pile of ashes." "Yes, and how well has that strategy worked for us in the past? Blaise, we've lost the past 5 Quidditch Cups to Gryffindor, and you know it. Half the reason is that the professors and the other teams can't stand us. Ravenclaw and Hufflepuff will lose matches deliberately to Gryffindor just to make sure we don't get the cup. And you think if you play all nicey nice that might change?" Draco folded his arms and leaned back against the wall, looking fed up. "Yes, I do." Blaise stopped to ponder this for a moment. There was a sharp scarlet flush in her pale cheeks, but Hermione could sense that her anger was fading. "You've changed," she said finally, raising her green eyes to Draco. "I don't know if I like it." "We all change," he said, unfolding his arms and stood looking at her, his head cocked to the side. Every line of his body expressed tension, but his mouth was smiling. It was a cool, tense smile, radiating the promise of things which might or might not be pleasant, but which one couldn't help wanting anyway. "You've changed since we played together when we were 5, haven't you?" The Slytherin girl arched her head back, a small smile playing on her mouth. The provocative pose could have been copied from the pages of Teen Witch Weekly, but on Blaise it didn't look silly. "Maybe," she said. "Do you like it?"
That depends. Draco reached out and gently touched her hair. Do you promise to conduct yourself better on the pitch in the future? Blaze lowered her eyelashes. I don't know. It's pretty simple, really, said Draco, and lightly touched her face, running his knuckles along the curve of her cheek, over her lips, down to her collarbone. Either you will, or you won't, he said, and dropped his hands to her waist, pulling her closer. In answer, she raised her face, eyes closed, and lips parted, and he kissed her. It was a slow, uncontrolled, unhurried kiss, a kiss that made Blaze go pliant under his hands, and her arms slid around his waist. Hermione felt herself flush scarlet. Now she felt as if she were spying on something that was none of her business. Even worse, she remembered what it was like to be kissed by Draco like that. She had never much minded his relationship with Blaze before. Now she found that she did mind very much, and was ashamed of herself for feeling that way. She screwed her eyes shut, and when she opened them again, Blaze and Draco had separated, although not by far. Blaze was smiling up at him, and in the darkness of the corridor, his pale hair and her scarlet shone out like beacons. It could have been Ginny who was standing in the center of his arms. But Ginny would never have smiled at him like that. I guess you will, Draco said, in a voice that made even Hermione feel a little wobbly around the knees. Blaze looked at him languidly. Under her dark lashes, her eyes showed green as a cat's. I'll be in the common room if you want me, she said, managing to make even that sound like an invitation to a round of unsavory but pleasurable activities. He let Blaze go, and she stepped away from him. Then she disappeared down the corridor in a swirl of green and scarlet, and as she did so, Hermione glanced back down and saw Draco looking up at her. Their eyes met, and she felt herself flush again. In the half-darkness, she saw his cool water eyes on her, and she knew what had gone into that kiss. All the fierceness and the fury and the passion that he felt for someone other than Blaze. Draco, she said. He smiled, but it didn't meet his eyes. There was something else in them, a shadowy something, despairing and primal. Yes? Do you love her? She said. It wasn't what she had meant to say at all. What do you think? I don't think you do, said Hermione, now certain of it. You kiss her like you're trying to get revenge. Revenge on who? Draco said, his voice tight with exasperation. Or maybe it was something else. Hermione shook her head. I don't know. Well, said Draco and shrugged. I'll me when you find out. Maybe there's a book in the library on it. Draco? The word came out as a half wail, half accusation. Why are you acting like this? I'm not acting, he said. This is the way I am. He raised his chin further, as arrogant and proud as she had ever seen him. And the torchlight flared on his bright hair and then vanished, as if a shadow had come between them and the light. If you think, just leave me alone, Draco said, and turned on his heel and walked away. Hermione watched him go, the tension in her chest almost unbearable. Exhausted, Harry walked slowly down the long corridor that led to the abandoned armory. Once a week, on Fridays, he made this journey, always at 6 o'clock, the hour before supper. On the first day of school, Dumbledore had shown both him and Draco the way. The walls here were dusty and bare of decorations and tapestries. His feet echoed on the stone floor, the sound making him feel strangely lonely. He had been in the infirmary for half an hour before Madame Pomfrey had shooed him and the rest of the Gryffindor team out of the door. Since then, he had made a cursory search of the castle, but had not been able to find Hermione,
and then it had been time for his appointment with Draco, and he'd had to go. He felt a little annoyed that he hadn't been able to track her down, especially since she had run off after Draco. He did not want to be without her, especially not after the traumatic events of the game, but perhaps he had no right to require her company, not after the way he'd been acting lately. He felt her being torn from him, and there was nothing that he could do about it, it seemed. A dull sense of an inevitable loss immobilized him. He had reached the end of the corridor, and the door in front of him was old dark wood, banded with bronze. He pushed the handle down, and the door swung open before he went in and shut it carefully behind him. Behind the door was a large, oval-shaped room with high windows, at least 20 feet above Harry's head, that were barred with iron grills. It was empty of furniture, save a long table that ran along one wall, which was also bare of ornamentation, and instead was lined with empty glass cases that had once held swords and shields, axes and lances, enchanted weapons of all types. Now it was never used. Dust motes floated in the weak rays of winter twilight that lanced down through the grilled windows. In one bluish ray of light, Draco was standing, his back against the table, his head down as if he were either thinking very hard or was very tired. Terramus Est lay in all her steel-silver glory on the table behind him, the non-light catching the etchings all along the shaft and making them glow like fire letters. The fragile light also lit his pale hair to a colorless sort of radiance, like mother of pearl. He was still wearing his emerald-colored Quidditch robes, although in the darkness they looked nearly black. "She's all right," said Harry by way of greeting, and took another step into the room. Draco raised his head. "Is she awake?" "No, not yet." Harry was in the center of the room now. "Look, about what happened on the Quidditch pitch." "Yeah," said Draco tonelessly. "I'm sorry about that." Harry sighed. "Malfoy, I've been thinking we should stop." "Stop fencing practice? Why?" "No, not that." Harry dropped his hand and rested it for a moment on the hilt of the sword at his waist. "Stop pretending that we hate each other. I know what I said earlier today, but upon reflection, I'm beginning to hate the lie." "I don't think we can stop," said Draco. "House pride runs too deep." Harry looked almost angry for a moment, and seemed to check himself. "Do you still want to practice?" "Yes," Draco said, and reached behind him and lifted his sword off the table. "It's better than starting in on that homework assignment Lupin gave me earlier." "What assignment is that?" Harry asked, as Terramus Est flashed down towards his own sword, which he raised to block the thrust, stepping forward as Draco had taught him. "The one for our end-of-year project," Draco replied, as the swords clanged against each other and rang like bells in the silent room. "Oh," Harry said, and cut at Draco. Draco returned, and they moved in slow, unrehearsed dance of fencing around the room, neither rushing nor slowing their movements. "He assigned us to be partners, just so you know," he informed him, and Harry was so surprised that Draco was able to drive him back 6 steps, 7, until his back was against the wall, then let his next thrust come up and ducked up under it, pushing off the wall to get extra force. His blade clanged against Draco's, hard, striking a haze of sparks that lit the air between them. Draco fell back. "Good," he said. Harry didn't reply, only swung his sword again, attacking. Draco parried and riposted. Harry feinted and attacked again. He took a long step back, moving out of range, then ducked under Draco's guard and attacked. His sword rode high off of Draco's parrying blow and struck the other boy's shoulder. There was a whisper of parting fabric, and a slice opened in the sleeve of Draco's shirt. Harry froze immediately. "I'm sorry," he said quickly. Draco also paused, looking surprised. "It's fine." Harry felt his fingers whiten as he gripped the hilt of Gryffindor's sword. "I could have hurt you."
Draco shook his head. Not unless I let you. That was a good trick, but you're still telegraphing your moves. I guess my mind is elsewhere. Hermione, Draco said, and Harry nodded. Look, why can't you just tell her what you told me last night? She'll understand. Harry looked down at the hand which was sheen with a light sweat. There's one problem there. What? I don't remember what I told you last night. Draco's mouth twitched. I don't suppose you'd believe it if I told you that you said you're actually carrying on a mad secret affair with Professor Sprout, and you've been exchanging photographs with her that involve you dressed up like a giant woodchuck. Nonsense, said Harry. I would never dress like a woodchuck. Naturally. Now a lemur, maybe. A marmoset even. But a woodchuck? With those teeth? Now you're scaring me. Harry laughed. It was the first time he had laughed in a while. Anyway, this is Hogwarts. Everyone knows everyone else's business. Who could carry on a mad secret affair here? Said Draco. I suppose you're right. Unless you're willing to stand in line for the astronomy tower every Saturday night, there really is nowhere for would-be snoggers to go that's private. What are you complaining about, Malfoy? You're a prefect. You've got your own room, don't you? I only call it a room because I'm too lazy to call it the broom closet with sconces. We could sell tickets to this place, said Harry, grinning, as he glanced around the nearly empty chamber, especially considering the soundproof walls. Nice thinking, Potter. Glad to see Hermione hasn't got all the brains in your relationship. Draco cocked his head to the side. On that note, you seem cheerier. Yeah. Harry lifted his sword and made a half salute towards Draco. Thanks for the workout. It helped. Good. Draco paused and looked at Harry seriously. Potter, I've never asked you this before, but... But what? Draco hesitated, then asked his next question in the manner of one taking a step into the abyss. Where are your parents buried? Harry stood for a moment, very still. Finally, he said slowly, I have no idea. Draco blinked, but otherwise showed no surprise. Well, someone must know, he said, his voice very careful. Harry nodded distantly. Someone must, but no one's ever mentioned it to me, or ever offered to take me there. But then again, I've never asked. Steady, old Potter. Draco's voice was sharp. I'm sure Sirius would take you, or Lupin. Harry's vision snapped back into focus. He saw Draco standing in front of him, looking worried. I'd rather ask Sirius. I was supposed to talk to him tonight anyway. Okay. Draco shrugged elegantly. I just thought it might help. You know, closure. Closure? Sometimes you have to see things, Draco said quietly. See them yourself, to know that they're real. I know they're dead, replied Harry flatly. I know, Draco said, but lately I wonder if you know you're still alive. Harry looked down. He felt disconnected, as he often did these days, as if the body he looked down at was somebody else's and not his own. One of the laces on his left shoe was broken. He had no memory of having retied it. I used to be able to go to the Mayor of Erised and see my parents, he said. I can't do that anymore. A slight line of confusion appeared between Draco's eyes. Because you don't know where it is? Because I don't want to look in it, said Harry. I'm afraid of what I might see. The fluttering pink numbers on the clock beside the bed told Ginny that it was 2 a.m. She lay where she was, letting her eyes adjust to the half-lit darkness of the room. There had been people here earlier, a lot of people. She remembered Madame Pomfrey shooing the Gryffindor team out of the door, Harry putting his arm around Ron's shoulder as they went. Ron had looked quite shattered, and Ginny would have been touched if the ringing in her ears hadn't made her want to crawl out of her skin. She remembered Charlie coming in later,
sitting by the bed and holding her hand, and bits of snow dropping off him and melting on her wrist. The dizzying of the pain-relieving charms had taken over then, and Ginny had slipped into a dazed state where the room seemed full of shifting forms. The sounds of voices drifted in and out of her waking mind. She thought she heard George and Fred talking above her. She even thought she heard Snape and Dumbledore. She definitely heard Madame Pomfrey shouting at someone, but not before whoever it was bent over her and kissed her on the cheek. The Gryffindor common room was a constant, Sirius thought, never changing. Glancing around from his perch in the fireplace, he cast a fond glance over the heavy, overstuffed sofas and chairs, their thick velvet coverings dulled to a shine by years of use, the throw pillows with their gold tassels, the scratched low tables, the gilded portraits on the walls. Then there was Harry, looking so much like James, sitting on the floor near the fire, cross-legged. He was wearing black trousers and a dark blue jumper, trainers and no socks. He looked about 12, tired and very thin, so thin that Sirius had to bite back an exclamation of surprise. What was going on? "No, Sirius," said Harry quietly. "Glad you came." Sirius tried to keep his voice neutral. "Harry, you look exhausted." "We had a game today," said Harry flatly. "I know all about the Quidditch match," said Sirius, feeling not the least bit disquieted. "Lupin told me what happened. I'm glad Ginny's all right. Harry, are you eating properly?" Harry looked as if he were trying to remember the last thing he'd eaten, and shrugged. "I'm eating fine, Sirius. How are the wedding plans coming?" "Fine," Sirius added conversationally. "Are you looking forward to your pub crawl?" "I suppose so," said Harry absently. Sirius could see he was thinking about something else. "Have you got your dress robe sorted out?" "Uh-huh." "Did you know I've changed my mind about marrying Narcissa? I think I'll marry Remus instead." "That's nice." "Harry," said Sirius darkly, "what is on your mind?" "Nothing," said Harry hastily, and seemed to shake himself as if brushing off cobwebs. "Actually, there is something I was wondering." "That much is obvious." Harry locked his hands across his knees. "It's about my parents." Sirius looked at his godson, but his expression was hidden by his dark hair. "Yes?" "Where are they buried, Sirius?" Sirius felt his heart skip a beat. "Why do you want to know?" "Don't answer questions with a question." "I'm sorry, Harry, but I need to know why you want that information. What are you planning?" Harry snorted. "Just some necromancy, a little raising of the dead, some human sacrifice." "Harry, look, it was Malfoy's suggestion. He thought it might help me get closure. They're my parents. I have a right to know where they're buried." Sirius squeezed his eyes shut, then opened them slowly. "Doom's Hill," he said, and in his mind's eye saw gray-green grass stretching all around him, a hillside blown by wind and studded with tombstones faded by years of rain. "Have you ever been there?" Harry's voice was calm and steady. "Once," said Sirius. "Where is it?" "Near Godric's Hollow. If you want to go, I'll take you. After your newts." "But that's months away." "Harry, I understand why you want to go, and I also understand you're upset, but you don't understand," said Harry, and the wretchedness in his voice made Sirius pause. He sounded not just angry, but as if he had made a bleak realization. "You don't understand, and you don't want to. You don't care." He made a little gasping sound, but before Sirius could say anything else, Harry turned around and raced out of the room. Sirius heard the sound of his trainers clattering on the stairs, the door to the boys' dormitory being flung open, and then silence. He waited there for several minutes afterward, sure that Harry would come back, but he didn't. Hermione walked slowly down the corridor, wrapped in Harry's invisibility cloak, trying to muffle her footsteps by slowing her pace. She was well aware of the irony of the whole situation. Herself, head girl, in charge of making sure other students didn't break the rules, sneaking around the school long after curfew. She didn't care. She had gone beyond that. Finding the door in the wall where the floor plans had told her it would be, she put her hand on it and pushed. The door swung wide and she walked inside. The room was dark. There was one window set like a cold jewel in the north wall, looking out over the grounds. She could see the snow-capped ridge of the forbidden forest, and a diamond half-moon shedding its milky light over the ice-black world below. On the wall facing her, across from the window, there was a visible shimmer, like sunlight on water. She turned and walked towards it, and, as she approached, it coalesced into what she knew it really was, the Mirror of Erised, its motto standing out like a beacon in the light. I show you your heart's desire. In a single motion, she dropped the cloak and raised her head and looked into the mirror. 1 heartbeat's time passed as she stared, and then a second, and a third. On the 5th beat, her knees gave out. She heard Harry's voice in the back of her mind. I guess, he said, a person's heart's desire can change. She sat down very suddenly in the middle of the room, on the cold marble floor, and put her face in her hands. I thought I heard someone coming, she said, and twisted out of Ron's grasp so she could stand up. He tilted his head back, and she could feel his blue gaze on her back as she crossed the room and looked anxiously out through the high, grilled window set in the door. Outside, she could see an expanse of empty corridors stretching in 2 directions. There was no one there. You worry too much, said Ron. He was seated on the floor, shirtless, in jeans and trainers. His Gryffindor Quidditch robes were tangled in a heap beside him, where the 2 of them had been lying. His eyes were shadowed. She came back across the room and sat down beside him and put her arms back around him. He twisted around in her embrace and looked at her. If we did get caught, he said tightly, if someone did find us, what would you do? Ron, what would you do? He repeated. It would be just as bad for you if we were caught, she said in measured tones, as it would be for me. Worse, he said, in a voice that was a little hard. She reached up and cupped his face in her hands. I love you, she said. He blinked. She had never said this to him before. You do? She nodded. I thought you should know. For a moment, he still looked startled, and his face lit up, and he reached for her, pulling her close. I thought you'd never... Shh. She kissed him. I know. She put her fingers over his lips. You don't have to say it. I know you do. And that is all for this chapter, guys. Quotes. Fizzy lifting drinks is from Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, or Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. I don't actually remember if it's in the book, but there it is. We don't know the meaning of the word defeat. Well, we know the meaning of it. We're not stupid is from The Tick. Thank you for joining me. So, as always, like, comment, subscribe to the channel, and if you're new here, hello. I do this quite often. I do have a Patreon, so if you are interested in supporting me monetarily, not only do I release pop culture hot take videos at least once a month over there, I also have spicy art for my higher tiers. But if Patreon is not something that interests you, I also have a Ko-fi. Both of those are linked here in my About section here on YouTube. And again, thank you so very much, and I will see you all in the next one. Good night.